My name is Evelyn, I'm 68 years old, and just days after my husband's funeral, my own children laughed in my face as I inherited nothing but a single letter. Before I tell you how that one letter ended up costing them their entire $12 million inheritance, and everything else they owned, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The silence in the lawyer's office was the heaviest thing I'd ever felt. It was thicker than the polished oak of the conference table, heavier than the leather-bound books lining the walls. Across from me, my son Mark and my daughter Jessica weren't looking at me. Mark was tapping his new Rolex against the table, a smug, impatient rhythm. Jessica was checking her makeup in the dark screen of her phone. My husband, their father, had been gone for 5 days. Mr. Davies, our lawyer for over 30 years, cleared his throat. The sound was like a rock skipping across a frozen lake. As we were saying, he began, his eyes full of a pity that made my skin crawl. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the last will and testament of Richard P. Sterling. My Richard. His voice droned on, a formal river of legal terms, but I only heard 2 names. Mark. Jessica. He read through a list of properties, stocks, and bonds. Then he got to the main event. The reason my children were practically vibrating with anticipation. And to my beloved children, Mark Sterling and Jessica Sterling Conway, I leave the remainder of my liquid assets, the sum of $12 million, to be divided equally between them. Jessica let out a sharp, theatrical gasp, her hand flying to her chest. Mark didn't even try to hide it. He let out a low, triumphant chuckle and leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms as if he were king of the world. $12 million. The number just hung there in the air, obscene and glittering. My stomach sank like a stone. Mr. Davies paused, letting the weight of the announcement settle. He then looked directly at me, his expression softening. And to my dearest wife Evelyn, he read, his voice dropping to a near whisper. My companion and my heart for 45 years, I leave this letter. He slid a single crisp white envelope across the polished table. It stopped right in front of my trembling hands. A letter. For a moment there was just stunned silence. Mark and Jessica stared at the envelope, then at me. And then it started. A snicker from Jessica. A full-throated laugh from Mark. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and cruel. A sound that flayed the skin from my grief. A letter. Jessica shrieked, her voice dripping with venomous glee. After all those years of putting up with him, that's all you get? A letter. Guess you'll be living on memories, Mom, Mark added, shaking his head with a smirk. Don't worry, we'll take care of the real money. Their laughter erupted, filling that suffocating room, bouncing off the wood and the glass, piercing me from every direction. It was the cruelest sound I had ever heard. My mind flashed back to the funeral just a few days ago. I'd stood by Richard's casket, feeling hollowed out, empty. Mark and Jessica had stood behind me, not to offer comfort, but because it was expected. I heard them whispering, not words of sorrow but of business. The market's up, Mark had muttered to Jessica's husband. Jessica herself had spent most of the reception on her phone, laughing quietly at something someone had texted her. They hadn't shed a single tear for the man who gave them everything. They were just waiting for this moment, for the reading of the will, the final transaction, the official start of their new, richer lives. Now, back in the lawyer's office, their laughter finally died down into satisfied chuckles. They were already talking about new cars, about a vacation home in Florida. They were moving on right in front of me. I felt frozen, nailed to my chair by their contempt. I was a ghost in my own life, a relic from a past they were eager to bury along with their father. My fingers, numb and cold, finally closed around the envelope. It was thick, expensive paper. And on the front, in his familiar steady script, was my name. Evelyn. Something inside me, a tiny ember I thought had been extinguished forever, flickered. This wasn't just a letter. Richard never did anything without a reason. He was a meticulous man, a planner. He had chosen every word in this will, every stroke of the pen on this envelope. Mark and Jessica were gathering their things, their voices loud and careless. Well, Mom, it's been an experience, Mark said, not even looking at me as he shrugged on his expensive coat. Do call if you need anything, Jessica added, the offer as hollow as her heart. Though I'm sure you'll be fine with your letter. They turned to leave, their backs straight. Their shoulders squared with the weight of their new millions. They thought it was over. They thought they had won. They thought I was left with nothing but memories and a piece of paper. I watched them walk toward the door. The anger, cold and pure, began to push through the fog of my grief. It burned away the tears, solidified my shaking hands. They were almost at the door, their laughter already a memory in the room, when I finally found my voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shaking. It was quiet and it was clear, and it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. Mark. Jessica. They stopped, their hands on the doorknob. They turned around slowly, their faces a mask of annoyance and surprise. They weren't used to me using that tone. They expected tears. They expected weakness. They didn't expect this. I looked up from the letter, meeting their greedy, careless eyes for the first time since the reading began. I held the envelope up, just slightly between my thumb and forefinger. I held the envelope up, just slightly between my thumb and forefinger. Before you go, I said, my voice steady, I think you forgot something. Mark scoffed. What? Your touching letter? No thanks, Mom. I'm good. No, I said, looking from his eyes to Jessica's. You forgot your decency. Your respect. You forgot the man who gave you the very life you're so eager to cash in on. Jessica actually rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go. The guilt trip. Save it, Mother. It's too late for that. We have an appointment at the Mercedes dealership. They turned and walked out, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind them, leaving me in a silence that was somehow louder and more painful than their laughter. Mr. Davies looked at me, his face etched with concern. Evelyn, he started. If there is anything. I shook my head, cutting him off gently. Thank you, David. I'll be fine. I clutched the letter to my chest. I wasn't fine. I was shattered. But for the first time I felt something solid amidst the wreckage. This letter. It was the only real thing left in the room. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the traffic on the Starro Drive, or the turn onto my street. The house felt cavernous and cold when I walked in. Richard's favorite armchair was empty. His reading glasses were still on the side table. A wave of grief so powerful it buckled my knees washed over me, and I had to grip the back of the sofa to keep from falling. I cried then. Not for the money, not for the humiliation, but for him. For the loss of my partner, my best friend. The man who had held my hand through 45 years of life. I waited until the sun had set, until the streetlights cast long shadows through the living room windows. The children had already called, not to check on me, but to gloat. Jessica was sending me pictures of a new BMW from her phone. Mark had left a voicemail saying he was celebrating with a $100 steak. They were pouring salt in my wounds and they were enjoying it. Finally, when the house was draped in the quiet of night, I sat at our small kitchen table, the one where we'd shared thousands of meals. I turned on the small lamp, creating a single pool of light in the darkness. My hands were steady now. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold resolve. I took a deep breath and slid my finger under the seal of the envelope. Inside there wasn't a long sentimental letter. It was a single folded page of thick cream-colored paper, and something small and hard that clinked when I moved it. I unfolded the paper first. Richard's familiar, meticulous script filled the page. My dearest Evelyn, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have had to endure the cruelty of our children's laughter. For that I am more sorry than words can say. Please do not think my leaving you this letter was a slight. It is, in fact, the ultimate proof of my trust in you and only you. I am sorry for the pain of this day. But I needed to reveal their hearts before I could reveal the truth. They think they have won. They think they hold the prize. But what they hold is only a shadow, Evelyn. A carefully constructed shadow designed to satisfy their greed. The real legacy, the fruit of our life's work, I have left to you. I pressed the page to my lips, my throat tightening. He knew. He had seen the darkness in them. The same darkness I had tried for years to ignore, to excuse. He wasn't punishing me. He was protecting me. I read on, my eyes flying across the words. You will find in this letter a small key. It belongs to safe deposit box number 713 at the First National Bank on Newberry Street. Everything I could not trust them with rests inside that box. You alone are meant to open it. Do not let anyone know. Do not let them take this from you. They have been given their portion, their test. They have already failed it. What is in that box is yours. It is our true legacy. Trust yourself, my love, as I have always trusted you. With love always, Richard. A small metallic object fell from the folds of the paper into my palm. It was a tiny brass key, its number 713, etched faintly along the stem. It was cool and solid, a tangible piece of a plan set in motion long ago. I closed my fist around it, the edges digging into my skin. I sat there for a long while just staring at the key. Questions swirled in my mind. What could possibly be in that box that was worth more than $12 million? Documents? Jewelry? Something else entirely? My pulse quickened with a mixture of fear and anticipation. I thought of Jessica's sneer, the way Mark had leaned back triumphant, as though I had been dismissed from my own life. For years I had endured their disregard. Their small slights, their dismissive words. I had excused them, told myself they were young or stressed or simply didn't understand. But today when they laughed at me, I saw their true selves. And Richard had seen it too. I carefully folded the letter and tucked it, along with the key, deep into the zippered pocket of my purse. I wouldn't leave it in the house. Not now. I didn't feel safe. I thought of their casual cruelty, their utter lack of empathy. If they knew I had this key, what would they do to get it? The thought sent a chill down my spine. Tomorrow I would go to the bank on Newberry Street. Tomorrow I would learn what my husband had truly left me. And tomorrow my children's laughter might not echo so loudly. This wasn't just a key to a box. It was a key to my future. It was the start of Richard's final plan. And I was the one who was going to see it through. The morning air was cool and brittle, the kind that cuts through a thin coat and makes you pull it tighter. Boston was waking up around me, but I felt like I was in a dream. The drive to Newberry Street was agonizing. Every red light felt like an eternity. The little brass key in my purse felt like it weighed 100 pounds. A secret anchor in the turbulent sea of my thoughts. The First National Bank was an imposing building of granite and glass. A temple dedicated to money. I felt small and out of place as I walked through the tall glass doors, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the security guard could hear it. I approached the teller, a young woman with careful, kind eyes. My voice was barely a whisper when I explained why I was there. I slid the key across the cool marble counter. She examined it, checked a ledger, and then nodded professionally. Of course, Mrs. Sterling. Right this way. She led me past the velvet ropes and teller lines into a quiet, carpeted area. At the back was a massive circular steel door, the entrance to the vault. It looked like something out of a movie. She spoke to another employee, and together they went through a series of procedures, turning dials and entering codes. With a heavy, satisfying clunk, the massive door swung open, revealing rows upon rows of gleaming metal boxes. "One moment," the teller said softly, disappearing into the vault. I sat in a small private viewing room, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. The silence was absolute. My mind was racing. What if it was nothing? What if it was just old photographs, sentimental items Richard wanted to keep safe? My children's laughter echoed in my head. A letter? Is that all you get? What if they were right? The teller returned, carrying a long, narrow metal box. It was much heavier than I expected. She placed it on the table in front of me with a soft thud. "Take all the time you need, Mrs. Sterling," she said, and then she left, closing the door behind her. It was just me and the box. My fingers hovered over the lid. I thought of Richard, of his quiet strength, his meticulous planning, his last whispered words to me in the hospital. "Trust me, Evelyn. Everything will be all right." With a deep, shuddering breath, I lifted the lid. Inside there was no jewelry. No stacks of $100 bills. My heart sank for a split second, and then I saw what was really there. It was filled with neat, thick folders bound with twine, and sitting on top of them all was a heavy, leather-bound journal. My pulse quickened. This was Richard's journal, the one he always kept on his desk. On top of the files lay another sealed envelope, this one marked in Richard's familiar script. "For my wife's eyes only." My hand shook as I tore it open. "My dearest," the letter read. "What you see here are the records of my true wealth. These are not included in the official will. They are hidden in trusts and accounts known only to me and now to you and Mr. Davies." My breath caught in my throat. "Inside these folders, you will find the deeds to 3 commercial properties in downtown Boston. You will find statements for investment accounts with a value that will shock you. You will find the controlling shares in 2 private tech companies that are about to go public. These assets, Evelyn, their value is greater than the 12 million given to the children. Much, much greater. I had to put a hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp. Greater than 12 million. My children had strutted out of that lawyer's office like conquerors, but they had been handed scraps. The real feast, the true weight of Richard's legacy was here, in this box, in my hands. The letter continued. I leave all of this to you because I know only you will protect it, and only you will know how to honor what we built together. But there is more. The journal is for you as well. It will explain everything. My attention turned to the journal. I opened it carefully. His handwriting filled the pages, entries from the past year, sometimes weary, sometimes fierce. I started reading. October 12th he had written. Mark called today. He didn't ask about my doctor's appointment. He asked if I had considered liquidating the Cambridge property to help fund his new venture. It's the 3rd time this month. He sees me not as a father but as a bank. November 5th. Jessica visited. She spent an hour complaining about the cost of her kitchen renovation, and hinted that an early inheritance would be the perfect Christmas gift. When I tried to talk to her about Evelyn, about making sure her mother would be looked after, she just smiled and said, "Of course, Daddy." But her eyes were empty. She was already spending my money in her head. Page after page, it was a chronicle of my children's greed. He wrote of his disappointment, their cruelty, their utter disregard for anyone but themselves. He wrote about his deep, abiding love for me, and his growing fear that after his death, I would be left alone to face their avarice. The final entry, written just a week before he passed, made the tears finally spill over and run down my cheeks. This is why I have chosen this path, he wrote. It is not to punish them, but to reveal them, to themselves and to you. I have given them enough rope. Now we will see if they choose to build a bridge or a noose. And I have given you, my Evelyn, the power to decide what comes next. Use it wisely. The words blurred. Grief, relief, and something sharper, something I hadn't felt in years, churned inside me. Power. He had left me power. I gathered the files and the journal, sliding them back into the box. As I walked out of that bank, the weight of the box in my arms felt different. It wasn't just the weight of money. It was the weight of truth, of trust, of Richard's final unwavering faith in me. My children believed they had one. They had no idea that the game had just been set. And I was the one holding all the cards. I hid the box in the safest place I could think of. A false-bottomed cedar chest in the back of my closet. A secret compartment Richard had built years ago to store his old war medals. I told myself it would be safe there. But a seed of fear had already taken root in me. A fear of my own children. That evening, the front door slammed open without so much as a knock. It was Mark, tossing his keys on the counter with a clatter, his voice booming through the hallway as if he owned the place. Jessica trailed behind him, her laughter sharp and brittle. They were flushed with excitement, drunk on their sudden wealth. "Mom!" Jessica called out, sweeping into the living room with a grin that was too wide, too bright. "You should have seen the dealership today. 2 brand new cars gleaming in the sun. Dad really knew how to take care of us." Her words were deliberate, a cruel little twist of the knife. I forced a polite smile. "I'm glad you're happy." "Happy?" Mark echoed, striding in. He held up his phone, showing off a picture of himself leaning against a shiny black luxury sedan. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. You know, you should really think about selling this old place, Mom. Move somewhere smaller. You don't need all this space, rattling around here all by yourself." I felt the sting beneath his casual tone. Smaller meant forgotten. Smaller meant tucked away, out of their way. This house was my home. It was filled with 45 years of memories, of love, of life. It was all I had left of Richard. I folded my hands in my lap, willing my voice to stay steady. "This is my home. I'm not going anywhere." Jessica tilted her head, studying me with narrowed eyes. "You seem different," she said slowly. "Not as broken as I expected. Did Dad really leave you only that letter?" The question lingered in the air like smoke. My heart thudded against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. "He left me memories, Jessica. That's more than enough." She smirked, but her gaze sharpened, suspicious. I knew then that they wouldn't let it go. The first direct assault came a few days later. I was in the garden trying to find some peace among my roses, when Mark's new car pulled into the driveway. He wasn't alone. A man in a slick, ill-fitting suit got out with him. "Mom!" Mark called out, striding across the lawn. "Just the person I wanted to see." I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands. "Mark, I wasn't expecting you." "Yeah, well, this is John," he said, gesturing to the other man. "He's a real estate agent, a top guy in the city. Since you're being so stubborn about selling, I thought it couldn't hurt to at least get a proper appraisal. See what this old place is really worth." My blood ran cold. He had brought a stranger to my home, unannounced, to put a price tag on my life. John, the real estate agent, had the predatory smile of a shark. He looked more like one of Mark's poker buddies than a professional. "Mark, this is not a good time," I said, my voice tight. "Nonsense." Mark waved a dismissive hand. "John, just take a quick look around. The foundation is probably shot, but the lot size is good." The man John actually took a step toward my front door. That's when something inside me snapped. The grief-stricken widow vanished, and the woman Richard had entrusted his legacy to took her place. "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air and made both men freeze. "You will not take one more step toward my house." Mark looked shocked. He wasn't used to me using that tone. "Mom, relax. We're just looking." "No," I said, walking toward them, my garden shears still in my hand. "You are not just looking. You are trespassing. You brought a stranger to my home without my permission to try and intimidate me. This is my property. Richard left this house to me. Not you." I looked at the so-called agent. "And you, sir? You should know better. If you set one foot on that porch, I will call the police." The man John looked from the shears in my hand to the cold fury in my eyes and took a step back. He looked at Mark and shrugged. "Sorry, man. She's not having it." Mark's face turned a deep blotchy red. He was furious, but more than that, he was embarrassed. He had tried to assert his power, and I had shut him down completely. "Fine," he spat, his voice low and venomous. "Be that way. But don't come crying to me when you can't afford the property taxes." He stormed back to his car, the agent scurrying after him. They peeled out of the driveway, leaving a cloud of dust and the smell of burning rubber behind. I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest, the shears still gripped in my hand. They weren't just suspicious anymore. They were actively trying to push me out, to make me feel small and helpless. They had underestimated me. They saw a grieving old woman. They didn't see the woman holding all the cards. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was just the beginning. Their next move would be far worse. A few evenings later, there was a soft, hesitant knock on my door. It was so different from the aggressive pounding I'd half expected from Mark that for a moment, I was just confused. When I opened it, my grandson Leo stood there, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. He was 17, tall and awkward in his growing frame, but his eyes were the same gentle brown he'd had as a child, and right now they were wide with worry. "Grandma," he whispered, "can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He walked into the living room and sank into the couch, his shoulders hunched as though he were carrying a weight far too heavy for him. Leo was Mark's son, but he was nothing like his father. He was a quiet, thoughtful boy who had spent more time at my house growing up than his own. Richard and I were the ones who took him to the park, who helped him with his science projects, who listened when he talked about his dreams. His parents were always too busy with work, with parties, with themselves. "They're fighting again," he said finally, his voice cracking. "Mom and Dad. It's bad. It's all they ever talk about now. Money. And you." I sat beside him, the space between us filled with a shared anxiety. "What are they saying, Leo?" He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at his worn-out sneakers. "They think you're hiding something," he continued, his voice low. "A lot of money. They went through Dad's old papers, found some notes from Grandpa Richard about some trusts they didn't know about. They're really angry." He finally looked up, his eyes pleading. "Are you, Grandma? Are you hiding something?" The question pierced me, not with suspicion but with a kind of desperate hope. He wasn't asking for money. He was asking for the truth in a house built on lies. I made a split-second decision. I trusted him. More than that, I needed him. I went to my room and retrieved Richard's journal from its hiding place. I brought it back and placed it in his lap, open to a page I had marked. It was an entry about Leo. Leo came over today, Richard had written. He fixed my laptop. A brilliant, kind boy. He has your heart, Evelyn. He is the only one who sees beyond the dollar signs. In a family of wolves, he is our only hope. Our true legacy. Leo read the words in silence, his lips moving slightly. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He wrote that about me? He meant it, I said softly. A tear slid down his cheek. They want to hurt you, Grandma, he whispered. I heard them. They were in the kitchen. They thought I was upstairs with my headphones on. They're planning to take you to court. I felt a familiar chill. On what grounds? Leo swallowed hard. They're going to say you're not fit to manage your affairs. That you're mentally incompetent. Dad said you're old and fragile. And Mom said you might be losing your mind. The silence that followed was unbearable. The children I had raised, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose nightmares I had soothed, they were now plotting to have me declared insane so they could steal from me. It was a level of cruelty that was almost beyond comprehension. I drew a deep, shuddering breath, forcing calm into my voice. And what did you do, Leo? He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. I recorded them, he said, his voice barely audible. He pressed play. Their voices, muffled but clear, spilled into my quiet living room. Jessica's sharp, confident tones. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's probably losing it. If we take it to court, any judge will see she's incompetent. They'll have to give us guardianship. Then Mark's laugh, low and ugly. We'll get everything she's hiding. Trust me, by the time we're finished, she'll be sitting in a nice, quiet home, and we'll be sitting on her fortune. It's for her own good, really. Leo stopped the recording. His hands were shaking. They're serious, Grandma. They hired a lawyer and everything. They're going to do it. I reached across the table and took his hand in mine. My fingers were cold, but my grip was steady. In his terrified, loyal face, I saw the hope Richard had written about. I was not alone in this fight. You have done the right thing, Leo, I said, my voice filled with a strength I didn't know I had. Thank you. That night, long after he'd gone, I sat with Richard's journal. My husband had seen this coming. If they cannot love, they will try to devour, he had written. Protect yourself. Protect what matters. I thought of the courtroom, of their smirks as they painted me as senile and broken. No, if they wanted a war, I would not face it trembling. I would face it armed. And my grandson had just handed me the ammunition. The next morning the air felt charged electric. The threat was no longer a vague shadow. It had a name, guardianship, incompetence, and a voice, the one I'd heard on Leo's phone. I called Mr. Davies' office and told his secretary it was an emergency. He saw me within the hour. I sat across from his heavy oak desk, the same desk where my children's laughter had echoed just weeks before. I relayed everything Leo had told me. Then I placed Leo's phone on the desk between us. He recorded them, I said. Mr. Davies listened, his expression growing grimmer with every word. The color drained from his face as he heard Mark's chilling laugh and Jessica's cold calculations. When the recording finished, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. He was silent for a long moment. It's worse than I feared, he murmured, his voice heavy. They're not just greedy, Evelyn. They're ruthless. He looked me straight in the eye. But your husband was a brilliant man, and he was always 2 steps ahead. He prepared for this exact ugly scenario. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? There is something you haven't yet seen, he said, turning to the large, formidable safe behind his desk. He spun the dial, the clicks echoing in the quiet room, and pulled out a single sealed envelope. It was the same cream-colored stationery as the letter I'd received, with Richard's handwriting scrolling across the front. For my wife, Evelyn. To be opened only if the children turn against her. My breath caught. It was a message from beyond the grave. A final contingency from the man who had always protected me. My hand shook as I reached for it. Open it, Mr. Davies said quietly. It may be the key to ending this. The envelope trembled in my hands, as though it held not paper, but the weight of my entire future. I broke the wax seal, my heart hammering against my ribs, and unfolded the letter. Richard's handwriting flowed across the page, strong and certain. My love, it began. If you are reading this, then my greatest fear has come to pass. The children have chosen greed over love, and they have turned against you. I prayed it would not come to this. I could not change their hearts, but I could ensure that they would reap exactly what they sowed. Their inheritance was never free, Evelyn. It was a gift with a poison pill attached. I had to read that line again. Poison pill. I have spent the last 10 years quietly absorbing the debts from their failed business ventures, their bad investments, the loans they took and defaulted on. I paid them off to save them from ruin and to protect the family name. But I did not forgive the debts. I restructured them. I tied them, legally and irrevocably, to the very inheritance they have just received. Their $12 million is attached to a portfolio of liabilities that far exceeds its value. I looked up at Mr. Davies, my eyes wide with disbelief. He simply nodded, confirming the impossible. The letter continued, these debts and tax liabilities will remain dormant, hidden within the complex legal structure of their trust, under one condition: that they accept their inheritance and do not attempt to legally seize any further assets from my estate, specifically from you. The moment they file a lawsuit against you, the moment they try to have you declared incompetent to get their hands on what is rightfully yours, they trigger a cascade of clauses. The protective shields fall. The debts become due. The tax penalties activate. They will unleash a storm they cannot control. Should they push you into court, Evelyn, they will not gain a fortune. They will inherit ruin. And when the dust settles, they will have nothing. My breath caught, the words blurring as I read them again and again. Henry had crafted not only a gift but a trap. A net woven so tightly that their own greed would be the blade that cut them down. Mr. Davies slid another thick folder across the desk. These are the documents, he explained. The loan agreements, the tax filings, the personal guarantees Richard concealed within the trusts. If the children had simply been satisfied with what they were given, these would never have seen the light of day. He tapped the folder. But by coming after you, they light the fuse themselves. I stared at the papers, my pulse hammering. Part of me recoiled at the thought, destroying my own children, watching them fall from luxury into dust. But then I remembered the recording. She'll be sitting in a nice, quiet home, and we'll be sitting on her fortune. They had chosen this path. They had declared this war. I lifted my eyes to meet Mr. Davies' gaze. If it comes to that, will you stand with me? His expression softened, and for the first time, I saw not just a lawyer but a true friend. I made your husband a promise, Evelyn, and now I make it to you. All the way. When I returned home, the house felt different. It was no longer a place of fear, but a fortress. They thought they were laying siege to me, but they had no idea they were marching their armies off a cliff. Richard had left me more than a shield. He had left me a loaded gun. And my children were doing everything they could to force me to pull the trigger. Now that I had the ultimate weapon, I needed to be smart. I couldn't reveal it. I had to let them make the next move. I had to let them walk into the trap themselves. So, I decided to give them exactly what they were looking for, a target. A taste of hope that would fuel their greed and drive them over the edge. The opportunity came a few days later. Jessica called, her voice dripping with false concern. Mother, Mark and I were just talking. We're so worried about you all alone in that big house. Are you eating properly? I knew it was a reconnaissance mission. They were probing for weakness. It was time to set the bait. Oh, I'm managing, dear, I said, my voice deliberately a little frail, a little distracted. It's just, there's so much of your father's old stuff to go through. It's overwhelming. I paused, as if an idea had just occurred to me. You know, it's funny. I was up in the attic yesterday, and I found an old box of his. A heavy one. It's locked. I can't imagine what's in it. More papers, I suppose. The silence on the other end of the line was electric. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. A locked box. Found in the attic. It was exactly the kind of thing a confused old woman might overlook. A box? She asked, her voice sharp with an interest she couldn't quite conceal. What kind of box? Oh, I don't know. Just an old metal strongbox, I replied, feigning indifference. Probably nothing. I haven't had the strength to even try and open it yet. My mind has been so scattered. You should let us handle it, Mom, she said quickly, a little too quickly. You don't want to be overwhelmed with complicated paperwork. Mark can come by and pick it up. Perhaps, dear. I'll have to think about it, I said and ended the call. The bait was set. That evening I told Leo about my plan. His eyes widened. You really told them about a box? Yes, I said, smoothing the cover of Richard's journal. A box they will now become obsessed with. They will claw at each other trying to get to it first. I had worked with Leo to prepare it. We'd found an old rusty metal box in the garage. We filled it with Richard's old worthless business ledgers from a company that had failed 30 years ago. We even put a new cheap padlock on it to make it look authentic. But the real box, the one that matters, I told him, gesturing to the cedar chest in my closet, they'll never find. Because they're looking for a treasure chest, not a fortress. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. Then he looked at me, his expression grave. Grandma, when the time comes, will you really destroy them? The question hung heavy between us. I thought of my children as infants, their tiny hands curled around my finger. I thought of scraped knees, birthday parties, of laughter that had once been pure. And then I thought of their sneers, their threats, their cold-blooded plan to lock me away. They destroyed themselves, Leo, I said at last, my voice thick with a sorrow that surprised me. I'm only going to show them the truth. Later that night the phone rang again. It was Jessica. Her tone was completely different. It was strained, almost hesitant. Mom, she started. Mark is being very aggressive about this box. He's talking about just coming over and taking it. She paused. Are you sure about this? About all of this? Suing our own mother. It just feels wrong. For a single breathtaking moment, I heard a crack in her armor. A flicker of the daughter I once knew. A sliver of conscience. My heart leaped with a foolish maternal hope. Maybe I could still reach her. It's not too late to stop, Jessica, I said softly. But then I heard Mark's voice yelling in the background. What are you doing? Are you talking to her? Give me the phone. There was a muffled sound, and then Mark's voice, cold and hard, came on the line. Don't listen to her, Mom. She's just being emotional. We'll be by tomorrow to discuss the lawsuit. And to pick up that box. He hung up. The crack had closed. Mark had hammered it shut with greed. The last bit of hope I had for my daughter died in that moment. They had made their final choice. Now all that was left was for them to face the consequences. I went to bed that night with a heavy heart, but a clear mind. I had given them a chance to turn back. They had refused. The path to the courtroom was now clear. The days leading up to the court date were a special kind of hell. They were waiting for me to break, to give them the box, to surrender. When I didn't, they decided to escalate. They decided to hit me where they thought I was most vulnerable. It happened on a Tuesday. I had a routine doctor's appointment, a simple checkup. Afterwards, I went to the pharmacy to pick up my prescription for blood pressure medication, the same one I'd been on for years. I handed the pharmacist my prescription card and my credit card. He ran it, and a frown creased his forehead. He tried again. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling, he said, looking embarrassed. Your card was declined. Declined, I said, confused. That's impossible. Try it again. He did. Declined, he repeated, sliding the card back to me. Insufficient funds. My face burned with humiliation. The people in line behind me were starting to stare. Insufficient funds? That account had tens of thousands of dollars in it. It was the main joint account Richard and I had used for everything. I fumbled in my purse for some cash, my hands shaking so badly I could barely count the bills. I had just enough. I walked out of that pharmacy feeling dizzy, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat in my car and immediately called the bank. I was put on hold, listening to terrible canned music, my anxiety growing with every passing second. Finally, a customer service representative came on the line. Yes, Mrs. Sterling, how can I help you? I explained what had happened. There was a pause and the sound of typing. I see the problem, the woman said, her voice professionally detached. The account was closed this morning. Closed? My voice was a strangled whisper. What do you mean closed? I didn't close it. No, ma'am, she said. The request was made by the primary account holder, Mr. Mark Sterling. He had all funds transferred to a new private account. The phone felt heavy as a brick in my hand. I couldn't breathe. Mark. He had done it. He had cut me off. The account we use for groceries, for the electricity bill, for my medication, he had just taken it. It wasn't about the money. He had millions now. This was about power. It was a calculated, cruel act designed to cripple me, to make me utterly dependent on him, to frighten me into submission. It was his way of saying, I control you now. A hot flash of pure, undiluted rage crawled up my neck. I thought of Richard, of how he had always made sure I would be secure, that I would never have to worry. And this is what his son had done. He had weaponized our shared history, our shared finances against me. This was no longer a legal battle. This was personal. This was a son trying to break his mother. He was trying to take away my independence, my dignity. He wasn't just after the money Richard had left me. He was after my very identity. I drove home in a daze, the little white paper bag with my prescription on the passenger seat beside me. It looked so small, so fragile. He had tried to deny me even that. I thought about calling him, about screaming, about begging. But I knew it would be useless. It would only feed his sense of power. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in Richard's empty armchair, the house dark around me. The fear was gone. The grief was gone. All that was left was a cold, hard certainty. There would be no more chances. No more moments of hesitation. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. They thought that by closing a bank account they had put me in a cage. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They hadn't caged a frightened old woman. They had cornered a mother bear. And they had forgotten that I had claws of my own. The courtroom couldn't come soon enough. The courthouse smelled of old wood, dust and desperation. I sat at the defendant's table beside Mr. Davies, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Across the aisle, Mark and Jessica sat with their lawyer, a slick, overconfident man in a suit that probably cost more than my car. My children wouldn't look at me. They whispered to each other, smug smiles playing on their lips. They looked at me as if I were already a ghost, a problem that was about to be solved. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Carol Atwood with sharp, intelligent eyes, called the room to order. Their lawyer rose first, his voice smooth as oil. Your Honor, my clients, Mark Sterling and Jessica Conway, are here today with heavy hearts. They are here out of love and concern for their mother, Evelyn Sterling. He gestured toward me. A woman who, since the tragic passing of her husband, has been in a state of declining health. We believe she is no longer capable of managing her own affairs. Furthermore, we have reason to believe she is concealing significant assets from the estate, assets she is mentally unfit to manage. We are petitioning the court to grant temporary guardianship to her children, to protect both her and her late husband's legacy. My children nodded solemnly, masks of concern perfectly painted across their faces. Jessica even dabbed at a dry eye with a tissue. It was a disgusting, masterful performance. My blood boiled, but I remained still, my face serene, just as Mr. Davies had instructed. When it was our turn, Mr. Davies rose slowly, his age giving him an air of quiet authority that their lawyer's expensive suit couldn't buy. Your Honor, he began, his voice calm and measured. My client, Mrs. Sterling, may be grieving, but she is neither incompetent nor deceitful. What we have here today is not a question of her capacity. It is a textbook case of predatory greed. A murmur rippled through the small courtroom. Mark stiffened, his jaw clenching. Mr. Davies walked to the judge's bench and laid a thick, bound folder on it. Before his passing, Henry Whitaker, forgive me, Richard Sterling, was a meticulous man. Mr. Davies corrected himself, a subtle nod to Richard's foresight. He prepared extensive documentation for just such a contingency. Your Honor, the petitioners have based their entire case on the idea that their mother is hiding assets from them. The truth is, their father hid assets for their mother, and he hid liabilities within their own inheritance. Judge Atwood opened the folder, her eyebrows raising slightly as she began to read. These records will show, Your Honor, Mr. Davies continued, his voice resonating with power, that the $12 million inheritance granted to the petitioners was not without its burdens. Attached to their trust by their father's own design are significant hidden debts, outstanding commercial loans, and deferred tax penalties. These liabilities were structured to remain dormant, on one condition. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension build. That condition was that they make no further legal claim on their father's estate. By bringing this baseless and cruel action against their own mother today, by filing this petition to seize what is rightfully hers, they have triggered Clause 7B of the Sterling Family Trust. They have, in essence, just voluntarily accepted full and immediate responsibility for every single dollar of those liabilities. The color drained from Jessica's face. She looked like she'd been slapped. Mark half rose from his seat. "That's impossible. You're lying," he barked. "Order," Judge Atwood snapped, her gavel cracking against the wood. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling." Mark sank back into his chair, his face pale as marble. Their lawyer was frantically flipping through the copies of the documents, his confident expression melting away into sheer panic. "I assure you, Your Honor, the signatures, the trusts, and the filings are all legal and valid," Mr. Davies said coolly. Their father anticipated this very scenario. He built a firewall to protect his wife, and a trap for his children's greed. Today they have walked right into it. The courtroom was buzzing with whispers. I sat still, my heart hammering, but I allowed myself to meet my children's horrified eyes. The smugness was gone. The arrogance had vanished. All that was left was the dawning, sickening realization of what they had done. Henry had laid the trap years ago, and their own greed had just sprung it shut on them. Judge Atwood closed the folder with a decisive thud, her sharp eyes fixed on Mark and Jessica. The court sees no evidence whatsoever of incompetence on the part of Mrs. Sterling. In fact, it seems she is the only one in this family who understood her husband's wishes. The petition for guardianship is emphatically denied. She wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, her voice laced with ice, I advise the petitioners to consult with financial and tax counsel immediately. This court action appears to have awakened considerable financial obligations. This case is dismissed. She slammed the gavel down again. It was over. I rose slowly, leaning on the table, and for the first time, I allowed myself to show them a small, steady smile. Let them laugh now. Because their laughter had just cost them everything. It began slowly, like the first cracks in a sheet of ice. A frozen bank account here. A sternly worded letter from the IRS there. But soon the cracks spread, running jagged lines across the glittering facade my children had built for themselves in just a few short weeks. The first to feel the full force was Mark. His new Porsche, the one he'd bragged about incessantly, was repossessed from the parking garage at his office in front of all his colleagues. The humiliation was immense. He stormed into my driveway the next morning, his face red and swollen with fury. He didn't knock. He just stood on my lawn and shouted, "This is your doing," he screamed, pounding on the hood of his remaining car, the luxury sedan he'd bought. "You ruined me. You couldn't just be happy with your memories, could you? You had to destroy us." I stood at my living room window, silent, the curtains drawn just enough to watch. He looked smaller without his arrogance, his bluster deflating when no one answered the door. He was a bully on a playground who had finally been punched back. Eventually, he got in his car and drove off, tires screeching, but even that sounded desperate rather than powerful. Jessica's unraveling came more quietly, but was no less devastating. Creditors began calling her office, harassing her secretary. The down payment on her Florida vacation home, the one she'd spoken of with such pride, was seized to cover a portion of a massive commercial loan Richard had co-signed for her years ago. The new furniture she had ordered for her house was cancelled. Her perfect, curated life was being dismantled piece by piece. One afternoon, I was driving back from the grocery store when I saw her car parked down the street from my house. She was just sitting in it, her head buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. For a fleeting, painful moment, the mother in me wanted to go to her, to wrap my arms around her and tell her it would be okay. But then Richard's words from his journal returned to me. They must reap what they sow, Evelyn. This wasn't my doing. This was the consequence of her choices, of her greed, of her cruelty. I drove past, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. The whispers spread through our social circles with the speed of a wildfire. The proud heirs of the Sterling fortune were drowning in debt. Their shiny new toys were stripped away. Their names, once whispered with envy, were now whispered with a mixture of pity and scorn. The triumphant laughter from the will reading had curdled into a bitter, suffocating silence. Meanwhile, I began to live. For the first time in a long time, I walked with my head high. Neighbors who had once pitied me now nodded with a newfound respect, though none of them knew the full truth. Only Mr. Davies, Leo, and I understood the beautiful, terrible scope of Richard's design. At night, Leo would come over. He was my rock through all of this. He'd help me sort through the financial documents, his young, serious face bent over the papers. He was learning about trusts and investments, but more than that, he was learning about integrity. We worked like architects, quietly transferring Richard's real assets into more secure accounts. Some in my name, some in a new trust for Leo's future, for his college fund and beyond. We were rebuilding from the ruins, our bond deepening with each late hour spent over spreadsheets and signatures. They're tearing each other apart, he told me one evening, his voice a mix of sadness and awe. Mom blames Dad for being so aggressive. Dad blames Mom for being weak. They barely speak now. I think they're going to get a divorce. He looked down, and I knew he was thinking about the potential custody battle, though he was almost an adult. The thought still scared him. I reached out and touched his hand. Greed eats itself in the end, Leo, I murmured. Even as a grim satisfaction swelled within me, there was sorrow too. These were my children. The babies I had rocked to sleep, whose hands I had held on their first day of school. Watching them sink into a pit of their own digging, I felt the ache of a mother's heart alongside the triumph of a wronged woman. But Richard had given me more than wealth. He had given me the power to choose. And I knew now that my choice was not to save them, but to let them finally see the truth of who they had become. The storm had broken. Their paper empire was gone. And I, the woman they had left with nothing, was the only one still standing. Mr. Davies insisted the final meeting take place in his office. Neutral ground, he called it. A place where the walls could contain what was bound to break loose. Mark and Jessica arrived separately. They looked like ghosts of their former selves. The expensive clothes hung on them, but the arrogance that once filled them out was gone. Their faces were drawn and tight, their eyes hollowed out by sleepless nights and endless calls from creditors. They sat on opposite sides of the room, the space between them frigid with blame. I entered last, and Leo walked quietly beside me. His presence was a steadying force, a silent testament that not all bonds in our family had rotted away. Mr. Davies rose, his face impassive, and laid a single, thick folder on the table. "Thank you for coming," he began. "We are here to put to rest any remaining disputes concerning Richard Sterling's estate." Jessica leaned forward, her voice sharp and brittle. "Disputes? You mean the lies? She's been hiding money from us since the beginning. She did this to us." Her words lashed out, but they rang hollow now, more a desperate plea than an accusation. Mark just rubbed his temples, muttering, "We wouldn't be in this mess if you had just told us the truth, Mother." I looked at them, my children, reduced to this by their own choices, and I felt a strange and painful mix of grief and anger. Then I stood up. My voice, when it came, was steady, each word chosen with the deliberation of a lifetime. "You think I've hidden something from you," I said, my gaze sweeping over both of them. "And you are right. But it was not mine to hide. It was your father's final choice." Their heads snapped up, their eyes fixed on me. I opened the folder Mr. Davies had prepared. Inside, on top, was Richard's journal. I slid it across the table. It stopped halfway between them. Neither of them moved to touch it. "Your father saw who you had become," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "He saw the greed that had blinded you, the entitlement that had poisoned your hearts. He wrote about it for months. He mourned the children he had lost long before he died." I gestured to the journal. "It's all in there. His disappointment when you begged him for money for your promotion parties. His pain when you ignored his calls but cashed his checks. His fear that you valued his salary more than his life." Jessica flinched as if struck. Mark stared at the journal as if it were a venomous snake. "So he gave you a test," I said. "He gave you wealth, and you squandered it before the checks even cleared. He gave you comfort and you demanded more. He gave you a chance to be gracious and you chose to be cruel. You chose to laugh at your grieving mother. You chose to try and have me declared mentally incompetent so you could take everything. Tears were now streaming down Jessica's face, silent and real this time. "That's not fair," she whispered. "We're his children." "Yes," I said softly, though my voice carried like steel. "But you were never his legacy." Silence, absolute and crushing, swallowed the room. My son stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists, trembling not with rage, but with something that looked like despair. I turned then to my grandson, who had stood silently by my side through it all. I laid my hand on his shoulder. His own was steady and strong. "This," I said, my voice clear and unwavering, "is his legacy. This boy who showed loyalty when you showed greed, who offered comfort when you offered contempt, who valued his family over a bank account. He is the one who will carry his grandfather's name forward with honor. Not you." The words landed like a judge's gavel. Final. Irrevocable. Mr. Davies closed the folder with a soft snap. "The estate is settled. There will be no further contests." That night, after it was all truly over, Jessica showed up at my door. It was late and raining. She was a wreck, her hair soaked, her face pale. "Mother," she choked out, "I have nothing. I have nowhere to go." I let her in. I gave her a bowl of soup and a dry blanket. She slept on the couch where she used to watch cartoons as a little girl. In the morning, I gave her $200. "This is mercy, Jessica," I told her, my voice gentle but firm. "This is for food and a roof over your head for a few days. But forgiveness is something else entirely. That has to be earned." She nodded, the tears starting again, and for the first time I think she understood. A week later, Mr. Davies came to the house. With Leo as my witness, I signed my new will. I left my children albums of photographs, memories of a time before the poison set in. Everything else, the house, the trusts, the legacy Richard had so carefully protected, I left to the one person who had proven worthy of it, my grandson. The war was over, and in the quiet that followed, I finally found peace. I'm sharing this story because I know I'm not the only one. I know there are others out there who have been betrayed by the very people they should have been able to trust the most. Family and money can be a toxic mix. If you've ever faced a situation where greed threatened to tear your family apart, please share your experience in the comments below. You are not alone. Thank you for listening. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more.